Hi, I'm Stathis, your host. Before we jump in this episode, let me introduce DevRel X. DevRel X is a hub for developer marketing and DevRel professionals. Stay home while DevRel X brings you rich content to boost your DevRel game. Access developer population insights, news, job openings, and more. Discover how to empower developers and grow communities at devrelx.com. Today's episode will start with a quote from our guest.
Biggest thing that we deal with in developer relations is people trying to define it over and over again, and trying to say like developer relations needs to fit in this nice box like everything else so that we can understand it so we can move forward. And I think it's something that for developer relations, it doesn't look like that for every company, right? Just as the same as engineering looks different at a couple different companies. We have the core basic of like I write code and I do it in this. I'm given an editor, I'm given a problem to solve. I do the thing, I deploy it, and it's done.
Hi, I'm Stathis, your host. Welcome to a new episode of Under the Hood of Developer Marketing, our /data podcast. Today, I'm excited to welcome a woman who leads the developer relations team at LaunchDarkly, Jessica West. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Will you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, I'm Jessica West. I run developer relations over at LaunchDarkly. Really excited. I've been doing developer relations for many years now, and coming from background in marketing and engineering, and really focusing a lot on the community and how we can help each other get better. And excited to be here on the show.
You mentioned engineering and marketing. I think you're the first ever guest to have a background, in both. Usually you have guys coming from engineering and transitioning to developer relations, or from marketing, and then So this is a first, and I'm very happy for it. So how did you end up in developer relations and your current role?
Sure. It was a path, a journey, as many of us have had with technology. But I started out in marketing when I first got out of when I was in college and then after, and really enjoyed it. But I always kind of started digging more and more into the technical part of it. So starting with SEO and looking at what makes websites tick, and then diving into working into CMSs and customizing things there and doing lots of work in PHP. And then I realized that I had an affinity that I was really enjoying engineering. So I started making a pivot and doing more work in databases and learning Ruby on Rails. Went through a boot camp, enjoyed that, and then came into an engineering role. And all throughout that, I was working with people and trying to finding a mentor, because anytime you're switching careers, it's hard to do that just on your own. So you're always looking for what's a person that has a path like me so I can know that that's a successful path. And so I noticed when I was making this change, there wasn't a lot of people that, were like me, or that I couldn't find a mentor really easily. So it was really important to me as I was making this transition to work in the community and help other people help mentors and help being that mentor for someone else. And so that's what kind of kickstarted my work in the community and just getting to know people within the technology space. And then I went into engineering more and more, and I was leading a team at a couple startups. And around that point, I was working with the state of Colorado and helping them run a couple of hackathons, a statewide hackathon for many years, and then started my own conference with partner Steve Kenny, and that was Dinosaur.js, or it is Dinosaur.js rather, and that's in Colorado. So doing a lot of community work between conferences, mentoring, and starting groups, and doing engineering full time. I just realized there's just a lot of work I've already been doing developer relations, so I made the full pitch and dive into taking a role as a developer relations advocate, and then quickly started leading teams into bringing in the management experience that I had from engineering and from marketing, and bringing that into developer relations. So it's really kind of a nice blend of everything, because I can help come in and speak to both sides of those bits. And now I've been at LaunchDarkly, started there earlier this year, and really excited.
Yeah, great. That's been a great journey, and I'm sure your community work in the earlier days as a being the mentor you couldn't find really helped you in the role in developer relations.
Yeah, absolutely. It really helped kind of start creating that empathy, and, sympathy and empathy moving from one thing to another. So I hope that I can continue from the lot of work they do, like helping be a mentor in the community to people.
Was there a driving force or a role model that led you to, being more interested in technology, or it all started with SEO and then everything, went from there?
Yeah, it's a combination of things. And so, it started with like the interest, of SEO and understanding what makes things tick. I've always been really excited about, like, it's funny that this is under the hood of marketing, because that's how I describe my interest, is like peeking under the hood, like how does this work? What's going on? And that's what really drove me into learning more about development and how the website works, right? And then even deeper, now that I know how it ranks well, how does it rank well, and what can I do better about making sure that my website has clean code, and what does that mean? And ultimately, like, understanding how things work and then trying to solve problems, because I think a lot of us, one of the really great things about learning how to code and being in engineering is that you have an idea, and then you can then take that idea and then bring it into paper and bring it to life, right? So you can see it from the idea stage into the beta stage of like, here's a prototype of what I'm thinking about, and then you can talk with people about it. And sometimes that doesn't always translate well when you're trying to get that to somebody else. So I think those are one of the reasons I was really excited about doing engineering as well.
Yeah, it looks like it's been a great journey, or more of a destiny, I guess, the way you described it, which is great. Was there a habit that you picked up in your childhood and you still carry to work life today?
Oh, yeah, probably a few. One thing I think is interesting. So I'm the oldest of four, and my parents, unfortunately, were separated at a young age. So it was lots of, managing and bringing things and trying to figure out, okay, here's the situation. How do we make it work? Whether that be through, like chore charts, or, getting allowance so that I could go get, my favorite ice cream down at the store, or or whatever it may be. It was lots of problem solving and trying to manage through chaos. And I think I talk about it a lot. I was like, I think working, like being the eldest, or like in a family of that nature, you kind of learn how to thrive and work in chaos, a little bit of controlled chaos. And I think that's a lot of things that you see in startups, right? Everything's going at a really fast pace. Not everybody's able to communicate as quickly as much as they'd like to, and really like any space, and especially right now where we're in pandemia, there's just a certain level of chaos that we're all experiencing, and how do we continue moving forward and driving through that? And I think from childhood, being kind of naturally in that space and having to move forward has been something that I've carried with me today.
Yeah, it's definitely a great skill to have, at all points.
Yeah.
Especially if you work on it since childhood. I think it's one of the top soft skills ever.
It becomes second nature.
Yeah. Oh, it's perfect for you. It looks like all the pieces of the puzzle come together, and everything in its right place.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's time for our insight-driven section called Let's Talk Data. Yeah. So please pick a graph from devrelx.com/trends and tell us why it stands out to you.
Yeah, so actually I really liked a lot of the graphs. I was looking through and I found myself just digging into each one. I was like, oh, this is interesting, and so I had a hard time, keying into it. But then I walked away and I stepped back and looked at it. I was like, what is something that's really interesting? Like, what is something that like I speak to and then I want to know it? And one of the things I looked at was the open source graphs. And it's actually between, everyone uses open source to also the types of people that are contributing. And so it was under like the 3 out of 5 developers contribute to open source software, and why they contribute, and out of like people using open source. And so I gave a talk about this actually a couple of years ago, maybe 5 years ago or so, at an event, and talking about the fact of like how when we say like everyone uses open source, and then really the concept and the thought around open source software in general. Like, I think a lot of us use open source software more than we think, or what we've technically defined as open source software. Technically, like Slack is open source, right? How many of us use Slack for work that we do, and every day in our jobs? Like we're using open source software everywhere. So I was looking at the point of like open source sample code, open source infrastructure libraries, and all these different things, and then thinking around who's contributing to these. So that one, and then we look at like the 3 out of 5 developers contribute to open source software. And I think it's unfortunate that we only have 3 out of 5. And then from there, why is that? Like, what is the cause for only 3 out of 5? And I think that we see that I'm sure there's many other people that have delved into this even deeper than I have, that talk around the environment that our open source, software like contributions technically have, right? And so from that we see, if you want to contribute to open source, there's a certain level of like, I need to feel like I'm good enough to contribute, right? And I think from that one, we don't see as many minorities coming in and contributing to open source software because maybe they don't feel like it's a as welcoming environment as we'd like, or like maybe like their code is not the same quality, and it's something that's deep at your core. Like it's a little intimidating to say like, here's something that I wrote, pick it apart, right? And so we feel like we do that in our engineering teams and through pull requests and things like that, and that's something we're okay with, right? Like it's a little uncomfortable, but we're okay with it because we assume like they know us as people, they trust us, they have our best interests at heart, we're moving forward. And then open source is another level of that, because you have to then have your code not picked apart just from people and people that you trust in your team, but from anybody. I mean, like there's all these people on the internet that are looking at that, and that's something that's really intimidating. So it's just interesting looking at that one. And then the reasons, the last ones, it says like 29% of developers contribute to open source software to improve coding skills. And I thought that was interesting because to me, I thought that would have been a little bit lower actually, because looking at them like I believe in open source, to solve an issue, I would have thought those would be the higher percentages rather than improving coding skills, because in my experience and from people I've talked with, that's typically the opposite because of the environment it's put in there. So I know that was a lot, but those are some of the things that I started looking at too from the trends.
By the way, on open source, I want to say it also for our listeners, what you just discussed, and this was, I think, a very good analysis of that. We also dive deeper. If you're interested in open source, we did a webinar a couple of days ago. It's on weknowdevelopers.co.
Oh, okay.
And it's free for everyone to see. But yeah, we've seen that a lot of people contribute actually to open source to develop their skills, and many people because they're fun. And as you said, it's if you get past this point where you are afraid of people tearing apart what you just created, it's also what leads to progress, because you can take one idea from one point and then using the open source community can, strive and create something great.
Totally, yeah, and I think, and it really, there's a lot of factors that come into it, for like where you are in your career and and how the comfort level, and maybe even kind of, if you take a deeper psychological level, like how comfortable are you with people that you're talking with, right? So if you are comfortable having that one and you really want to see that improvement, I think open source is a great way to improve that, because you are expanding the amount of like people that you have access to in that knowledge base, right? Not everybody on your team is going to have that same level of expertise on one subject that you would experience with working with an open source contributor elsewhere. So yeah, I think when it comes down to it, I would love us to continue to be better as a community in our open source community, to make it more welcoming and approachable, so that we can get more people and contributing to open source, and we can bring that large percentage of I don't contribute to open source software down, and looking at how do we have open source software as part of our everyday life, for not just using it but contributing to it.
That's true. Inclusion and diversity I think, are what leads to progress anyway. So yeah, we should try and get as many people as we can contributing to open source.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Before we continue, I just wanted to say that this data that we've been discussing, and all the data you can find at DevRel/trends, are data that come from our developer economic survey, which is from 30,000 developers annually in more than 165 countries. It comes in 2 waves, and its latest wave is actually now live. So for our listeners, I want to say that anyone who is a developer, whether you're just developing as a hobby, you're a student or a professional, you can take the survey at developereconomics.com, and you could win cool prizes that I have to envy at some points, I have to say. And your results will lead to stimulating conversation like the one we're having to and the one you're listening to, but also will help, as is our motto here, you will help the world understand developers and developers understand the world. Jessica, what do you love most about developer relations?
I think the thing I love most, which is what brought me into the space, is getting developers to that aha moment, that sweet spot, and that's from helping them solve a problem. I think that's that sense of of accomplishment, and that I was able to help someone move forward is huge. And I'm backtracking that too. I think that goes into having that empathy for developers, right? And so I was saying hey, I know where you are. I know what it's like to have production go down, right? And being paged at 2 a.m. and trying to figure things out, or trying to build search from scratch, or deciding what's the best way to where should I set an index on within my database to make sure it's the most optimum level of functioning. So all the different things that come into our lives as developers, and how we're still able to solve these problems, because it's hard, right? So if you think our product manager or our project manager comes and is hey, I need this feature built, and they drop it here, and it's then you can look through. If you have a great project manager, they've gone through a couple things of here's the process. I think this is how it should function. Here's the steps. Here's some technology. I just need you to build it. Not everybody is that lucky. There's some that are just hey, I need a thing. Can you go figure it out? And so it's lots of investigation and trial and error, and it's hard, right? So when you have people in a role like developer relations, and you can talk about here are some of the solutions you have out there, and it may not be the one that your company represents, but here you've talked with someone that's more that's helping be a subject matter expert on that one thing. It's a resource. And that for developers, it should be a resource of hey, I have a question about, feature flags, for example. What's the best way I should set this up? And developer relations and a developer advocate should be oh, sure. Let's talk about your problem first. Why do you think you need feature flags? Oh, yeah. Okay, that sounds great. Let's keep going. And going into that, getting someone to be oh, that's great. Thank you so much. I didn't think about that. Or maybe they were using your product already and they didn't quite understand what feature was doing what, and you're able to help clarify that, and getting that, whoa, that's awesome, I didn't know that, is huge. And that's it's such a great moment, and it's such a thing to kind of revel in, and I love it so much. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy and I love about what developer relations is and about.
Yeah, and I think it should be. It's a noble cause after all. When you help, or even when you just empower someone to achieve something, especially their goals, and as you said, in such a pressing environment at times, how can you not love this?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What has been then your biggest challenge? What has been the most difficult part about developer relations?
I think the biggest challenge is the misunderstanding of developer relations, whether that's from the community or internally. I kind of preach about this a lot, I guess, around how you can get understanding from them. Because I think the biggest thing that we deal with in developer relations is people trying to define it over and over again, and trying to say developer relations needs to fit in this nice box like everything else, so that we can understand it, so we can move forward. And I think it's something that for developer relations, it doesn't look like that for every company, right? Just as the same as engineering looks different at a couple different companies. We have the core basic of I write code and I do it in this. I'm given an editor, I'm given a problem to solve. I do the thing, I deploy it, and it's done. But there's different ways of doing that, right? So for developer relations, because it is this hybrid of coding, writing content, being in the community, it's hard. It's a lot of context switching. So you have to find a certain individual that fits that bill. You have to find the team that allows you to context switch and do that, so it doesn't veer all the way into marketing or all the way into engineering or some kind of hybrid of in between where you're not quite sure what's going on. And the bigger part thing too is like you need to be able to communicate your value and understanding to your management and your executives, right? And that's the big thing, right? Because without understanding from your executive team, your leadership, even if it has the best intentions of coming in and saying, yes, we want developer relations, if they don't quite understand why they want it or why they need it or what's the benefit to the company, ultimately that's going to lead to, to the team being let go and being eliminated because there's no understanding, and it is a cost center. So we look at the value developer relations is and what it can be, and it's so beneficial to working with the community, but it doesn't tie directly to the funnel. It doesn't tie directly to the product. It has 3 ties, right? So we're measuring not just community interactions, and we're measuring, like what are we doing to help bring things to the top of the funnel and bringing awareness to marketing, and what are we doing to help provide value to things that engineering is producing. So all that comes into there, if it's not properly communicated, or either internally and externally, it leads to a big misunderstanding, and then you're having the problems we've seen a lot of problems, a lot of companies today. Amongst anything else, I think that's like the number one challenge that I've seen coming into this industry, and then I continue to talk with people about.
Yeah, I totally agree there, and I like how you started it, from not being able to define it properly or trying to define it in a way that, as you said, and I quote, so we can understand it, and trying to communicate how beneficial it can be for an organization to the executive level has been, I think, the one that came up most of the times as the biggest challenge. Many people believe that without an executive sponsor, if you'd like, within the company, you cannot make it, and you cannot have a department that works and is successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the executive sponsor is huge. And I talk about it like you need a sponsor, that's someone that's like, yes, like I will be there, and you also need someone to understand it, and that's willing to them. And so you need like a little cheerleader and a sponsor, and what that looks like, because you need someone to be advocating for you at that table. If you're not at that table or your leader's not at that table, you need someone else to say like, yes, this is the value of developer relations, and here we go, and rah rah, like we're going into battle. And if you don't have that, then it's not going good.
Yeah, I think executive sponsors have come up a lot of times. Cheerleader is the first time, so yeah. But makes the point exactly, I think.
Yeah, well, yeah, former cheerleader here, so it's it plays.
So, except for cheerleading skills, what do you think are the skills that someone should possess so that they're a good developer relations professional?
Yeah, I think that let's start as an individual contributor, as an advocate. So coming in as a developer relations advocate, I think that thing that has the most authentic voice is when you can have empathy for the developers. And I think that's different when we talk about like empathy, and we hear it a lot. And I think there's a difference between empathy and sympathy, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. Empathy for developers and empathy in general is like when you say like, I've witnessed it, I lived through that. So I can tell you, like, I understand exactly what you're feeling. And that's a lot different than sympathy of saying like, oh, that sounds hard. That sounds tough. And let me lend you like my ear and let me talk to you about it. And I think that's the key difference here for developer relations, like, is having that empathy, right? You need to, in order to authentically connect with other developers and to be successful at your job, you need to know what they've gone through, right? And what you should be going through. So being able to walk the walk, talk the talk sort of thing. So coming in and having a background in software development, having a background and being able to write and communicate effectively. That's the biggest thing, is because we go back to communication. It's not just communication to, executives or anything else, but that's communicating to other engineers of like, oh, what is, like, let's talk about your problem. Tell me about that. And then how do I communicate the solution in the best way? Or how do we go back and forth? And so that communication is key. And that shows through writing and speaking. And that speaking, then you can use that for what we see a lot of developer advocates doing, is getting on stage and giving talks and talking me through what their companies value and why you'd want to use it. So really coming back to having a background and being able to like live through the experience as a software developer, assuming that's what you're doing for developer relations, as there's the title of developer in there relating to developers, and being able to communicate that idea. As far as managing goes, I think having that and having the experience of understanding it, but really with any management role, just being able to understand, like listen, understand like what's going on with your team, being able to communicate that and being able to help manage not just like your team, but also help being that strong advocate for them at the leadership level, right? So how are you communicating your team's value, right? How are you measuring that? And how are you saying, here's what the team did and here's why it's important and here's why it matters? Because as an individual advocate, ideally you shouldn't have to think about that. You should just say, here's what I'm working on, and you should understand, like, have that understanding of like this is the value I'm bringing to the company. But as far as communicating that all the way through and compiling and bring that and having that, whether it's a cheer or a battle, wherever you're going, that should be your manager's job. And so as the manager, as a leader of the team, they should be doing that on your behalf and working really hard to make sure all those efforts are being shown. So, and creating some of the amazing advocates we see out there, like there's a manager that's helping making sure that they shine the best they can. So it's really making sure, you can put your team first for a lot of things.
So I think that's a basic skill set, basic, not to minimize its importance, but basic that I think you should have these things if you understand what the role. And I like how you put communication, among the top ones, because I think it was very thankful during our first episode who said that to developers, I represent the company and to the company represent developers. So you need to have clear communications to both directions so that you can service both. And actually, this is the whole part, I think, of developer relations, being the link between these two and helping both produce the best they can.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Speaking about communication, the recent events, it's the pandemic, everyone's talking about it, have affected the way we communicate and we do everything, including our work. So how do you think the pandemic has affected developer relations?
I think it has affected developer relations as an industry. It looks different at every company, right? As we see for a lot of DevRel items. I think for some of the teams that may have been in that still kind of that communication window of talking with the executives and leadership of what is the value there and trying to figure that out, that we're seeing some more layoffs there because that value isn't being clearly communicated or the company sees the value but doesn't want to invest in it. There's a lot of things that we're seeing there, fortunately. And I think the unfortunate thing is for those companies that are laying those departments off is that having developer relations in your department is really important right now. And so that doesn't see that value is going to be it's going to hit a rude awakening, whether they see it in a few months or a year. But without that kind of key of talking with developers and bringing that value and saying, like, here's why this company is important, and here's why this is a good product for you to invest in, there's going to be some challenges. So as far as what's changed from a day-to-day role, there are no more in-person events right now. And so whether that's a meetup that you were running within your developer relations department, either for your company or as an individual, whether you're a road warrior, and going on and being at every conference that you possibly could and on the road 80 to 90% of the time, or even any percentage of the time, those are big effects. All right, so we're going to see a big swing the other way. There's a lot of other departments that have a developer relations department that focuses exclusively on content and code. So nothing's really changed for them, right? They're still doing the same work they have always been doing. So really, that goes back to like we were talking about, that a developer relations team can look different at different companies, right? And what's the biggest purpose? At LaunchDark, we had, at a hybrid, right? So we had some people that were traveling and some people that were just, were doing coding and content. And we had some people doing a little bit of both. So for us, we have just, prioritized and shifted a lot of our online content, which I think is really, really exciting, actually. There's a lot of really great stuff that you can do when you are able to be still and think through different challenges that you have or that the community's had and have a moment to really dive deep into some great ideas when we're not distracted by having to pack for that next trip or get on the plane, or there's a certain amount of chaos that you always have that you're managing traveling. And with that chaos removed, granted we have another chaos in there of pandemic, it allows us to be a little bit quieter and think through some things. So yeah, the answer is how is it? It's affected developer relations a little bit different at every company. But in general, I think actually Mary, Tess, and I were on a webinar. We were talking about through what does the developer relations look like at your company, and how you can help be an asset there. And there's just so many things you can do for developer relations that are beyond events and beyond travel. You just pick a path and you can go. So I think it's really interesting seeing how that's panning out, and for how we'll see developer relations teams function in the next few months.
You discussed about how developer relations is different in each company. Where do you think developer relations should be be under or be reporting to? Should it be marketing, sales, engineering, or should it be a different?
That question is right along with what backpack should I get for developer relations? It's a hot topic. So earlier on, I always thought that developer relations should be in product or platform, because I think it's the very neutral place, because you're not going all the way into engineering, you're not going all the way into marketing. And I still stand by that. I think the first answer is it depends again on the company values, and where does your executive sponsor lie? If the person that thinks that the biggest value you can bring to the company is in marketing, then I would be into marketing, because I want to be with that sponsorship and that my cheerleader. I want to be aligned with them and see whatever I can do to help bring that value. But ultimately, if we were able to if you were to choose who your sponsor was and who you'd want to help lead that in the most, let's say, impactful manner that possible, I go back to, I think, product or platform, because I think that it really helps you see at the core, developer relations, related to developers, we're thinking about the product, and we're taking how does that product relate to developers, and how do I think through that? And so if I think of that way, and product ideally should have this really beautiful feedback loop, right? Of, hey, community, we just had this new release. What do you think? And the community is like, oh, that's great. Let me look at it. And then they look at it and say, this was great. This was not so great. Here's what I could think could go better. So having that feedback loop open from product to go out to talk to the developers, and having that feedback loop coming from developers back into product works really nicely when you have developer relations there, because you have an authentic connection and a portal, so to speak, that people can come in and say hey, DevRel, I noticed that you have this new product release. I just used your product and I have some feedback. And product departments aren't always prepared to have that without developer relations, right? So that's why I think that's a really nice way of having DevRel there. And also it allows you to understand what's coming down the pipeline for engineering. So I can start working on a demo or some content to help show the value of it. And what are some things that we see could be an opportunity? So engineering and product work really closely together, obviously. And so you can work there and see, what's coming down the pipeline. And then simultaneously, product needs to then communicate to marketing and say, hey, we've got this new thing that we're releasing. We need a campaign around it. And then marketing is like, okay, we got this. And you can then help amplify that message with marketing, and again, from the authentic point, and saying hey, I understand from the developer community, here's where we can best hit that message, right? And oh no, you should absolutely not say that. And you can help, veto and help guide your marketing team to be that authentic voice. But you can do that with being in product. When we're in engineering, when you see developer relations teams and engineering alone, oftentimes you'll see it goes almost sometimes too deep into doing documentation and writing SDKs and doing all this coding work, which we can do. But then because we're working so hard in that, sometimes we forget, we lose touch with the community part, right? Because you're focused, you kind of have the blinders effect of you're just working in your own code and you forget about what's going on in the community. And on the flip side, going into the marketing side, if you're only in marketing, you can get, kind of doing a lot of social media and running the Twitter account or Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever social media you're doing. and talking out with us and doing the megaphone and forgetting about at the core what the product's representing and what engineers are at your company, what are they doing and how are they feeling for the product and represent it, and what could they be better? So living back, product and platform, I think, are a nice place for you to be, to kind of have your hands in both those and see kind of from like eagle's eye view of what's going on and help amplify that message no matter what.
It's amazing how, you're just answering the question, which I don't believe has a correct answer, because it's, as we said, it depends on the company, and plus it's such a hybrid role, because you just said it on how many different points, developer relations touches, and you're in marketing, and then you're in platforms, and then you're with the community, and
not to mention pre-sales or post-sales.
Exactly. Yeah, it's I wanted to mostly to pick your brain on that, and thank you for sharing all those, because it helps put the role in a better perspective and all the touch points that it has within a company. So this
absolutely.
is why it links to what we said before, how it's challenged to actually define the role.
Yeah, absolutely.
Assuming now that we're back to normal in the way we knew it, how do you see developer relations evolving in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think for developer relations evolving, there's a lot of great things we can look at. And so one of them I would love to see is for us to take advantage of better mediums and platforms. And what I mean by that is, for example, we've seen Twitch become a pretty big platform, right, in the past 2 years, I want to say. It was traditionally made for just, gamers, right? There's a lot of gamers sitting there using it, but now we're seeing it as another way of talking through and walking through a project. So Suze Hinton is one of the early people I saw doing coding on Twitch, and I was like, oh, that's cool. That's a different way. I hadn't even thought of that, because I've always, I've written a tutorial and I might do like a quick video of me trying to walk through something. But Twitch opens it up to another channel, which also helps us right now in the pandemic, right? Is that I can reach other developers through, kind of the comforts of my own home, right? And I can do that. It's not going to an event that maybe someone can't fit to, and it's coming on later. But it opens up a line of communication for, a Q&A and looking at what's going on my screen, what's going on their screen, and I think that is just a really, really great thing. So seeing developer relations evolve, I think taking advantage of all the different tools we have at our disposal and using that as a way to connect to people, because ultimately we're not going to be able to talk with everybody at once, right? That's not going to be affected through our website or just going to an event or putting things on third parties areas. But if we can take that same core message and put it in different places, that also helps different learning styles, which we can be better at, right? So people have that way of learning, of listening and hearing someone speak, and visually seeing code on a screen, through a repo or through a written tutorial, or watching someone live coding. Maybe that's the best way, because then they can code alongside. Those different targeting and talking with those different types of learning profiles, I think is one thing we can be much better about as an industry, and talk about openly and say here are the different things we're using, and here's the different why we're using that. And I think that's the next evolution I'd like to see for developer relations.
And it's also great how one, I want to say drawback, but it's much bigger than that, but you get the point, opens up access to new channels that we didn't even think about before that. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, because if you had asked me 3 years ago about Twitch, I'm like, Twitch what? It's what are you talking about? And I think that there's so many opportunities and probably things that I'm not even aware of, but that's stepping out of our industry and what we use as our regular tools, and looking at what other people use and connect, and how they connect, and maybe that's something that's even better than what we're using right now.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to see what the future holds for us, but I think more or less this is the direction I'd also like to see it getting at.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of drawbacks, you said it before that part of developer relations is getting on stage. Conferences are a big part of developer relations, and for some are their favorite part, and for others is a cause for burnouts. But the part they're playing is integral to developer relations, because this is the chance we get to actually meet developers face to face. So at a time when in-person meetings for large groups are just a big no, do you think that virtual events are cutting it? Will they be enough?
Yeah, I did a Twitter poll about this a little bit and started digging into, seeing from the data like what we're looking at just a week or so ago, and I think the answer is yes and. And I think that virtual events and like virtual, gatherings, we'll put them. I want to take events and conferences out of that. Let's just talk like it's a gathering of people. We're creating this community. I think that we can have that same impact and talking to people and getting that message out, but through a different way, and trying to take the same format we have for in-person conferences and trying to shoehorn it into Zoom, or I don't know. I mean, there's just a huge list of all the different styles that we have for video. I don't think that's working. And I don't think that's working to the same level we want. I think it worked at the very beginning of this pandemic because we were all just craving like, hey, I just need to see someone besides my partner or my pet or the wall. If I'm living by myself, I need to have that kind of exposure. But it's hard because that can be really draining of like being, standing and like looking at your screen and not moving for X amount of hours is much different, and trying to find that connection there is much different than what we see for going to an event. And if we look at the core part of going to an event, yes, for developers and connecting with developers, but we go there to make that authentic connection. And so replicating that online can be done, and it's a different way. But through all of the events right now, there's only been a few that I think that are able to really replicate that. So I guess right now, like if we rinse and repeat the same way we've been doing virtual conferences the past few weeks or past few months, I don't think it's going to cut it. I think that we need to change how we're approaching and talking to people, and then we will be able to. And at the same time, there's nothing that's going to replace that in-person connection. That's just like, we're humans, and that's okay. Like, I think we can recognize it and say, we are not going to have that same connection, and that's okay for now until we all know that we can do that in a safer manner. But finding that alternate way to connect, and we'll be able to get through it in that way.
Yeah, it's hard to replace, actual human connection, because you're for once through a virtual event you're missing the whole body language thing, which usually says more than we actually do.
Absolutely, yeah.
What do you think a virtual event should focus on to make up for this lack of physical one-on-one connection?
Yeah, I think creating more opportunities to create kind of quick hallway chat conversations that we saw that was like more of a natural way of like, how do I connect with someone that's interested in the same kind of content I'm in, or the same, same after event activity. Like, someone is really into karaoke, I want to go talk with them, or maybe we're trying to find, we're in a region that's got really good tapas. So we're going to go find that, like, what's the best tapas place and things like that. And all these things are driving that connection, or kind of opening up that opportunity for people to talk with other people that have a similar idea and interest. So if we can help replicate that for different events and creating, this, whether that be through quick, games of conversations of like, here's this question, like, raise your hand if you're interested in this, and now you go into this group, or randomly taking people into a group and then having them talk through a couple themes, I think is a great idea. I know there's a lot of things that we're going to see that I haven't even thought of, and I'm working with a lot of people in the community just talking through this, because I think there's some things that we can do that we haven't thought of, because we're still trying to think of like, how do I do online karaoke, which sounds like a lot. And there's a lot of like bandwidth and things there. So ultimately, like, we're not always going to be able to do that. So how do we replicate that same experience? I think the closest thing that I had to that I was impressed with was this software is icebreaker.video, I believe. I used it, and I wasn't quite sure what I was to expect, but I came onto the site and it pops up and there's a song playing and there's like a group chat going, and all of a sudden I was just re-energized from my day, and I was like, what's happening here? What did I walk into? And it was this really cool software that allows you to talk with people, and then you had a big group, and then you were paired off individually, and you had a couple card questions that you went through, and then that allowed you to get to know someone one-on-one, and you had a video, and it say went on for 8 minutes, and then you came back to the group. And they did that in a couple iterations. And I thought that was a really, really cool way of thinking about creating that connection and allowing people to work through how do I talk with someone else that I've never met without being really awkward. So yeah, that's one of the things, and I think we'll find out more as we continue, discovering this.
Yeah, I'm sure these are all great ideas, already, and I think the more we, as all events are now rescheduled to be online events, or at least most of them, I'm sure we're gonna see a lot of new stuff coming up to trying at least to recreate this experience.
Yeah, that's why, like, from all this chaos and stress, like, we'll have some really cool creative ideas that are born from it.
So another thing I want to ask you is, do you have any tips on how you can reach and talk to developers when you can't meet them?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things you can do. Going back to, like, reaching developers, where they are. Not a lot of developers are at those events, right? I think that's something that we assume, but not all developers have a budget from their company that allows them to go to those events. The time off, maybe not. They might be trying to get into software development, but they can't, justify taking, 2 days off to go somewhere to attend that event, right? They could be, waiting tables in the evenings for extra money to go to school, so that they could learn software development, or maybe they're doing a boot camp, or there's so many things, right? And how do we reach those people? We do it through a lot of things that we've been doing, that we should be doing in developer relations anyway, and that's writing content that can reach developers of talking like where they are. So not just on your site, but going onto different forums and saying, like, where are people getting stuck? How can I help them? Going onto platforms like dev.to and publishing, saying, like, hey, here's an idea I had, and being a part of the discussions there. They've got forums there. There's forums, everywhere. And so you can spend a lot of time just responding and reaching developers in different places online that you weren't able to reach even before at events. And that can be through written content, that can be through demos, through content of, live coding like Twitch that we talked about earlier. Yeah, it's just, and like doubling down on your documentation and working with engineers there. And how do you make it more accessible, and how do you make it more interactive? I think there's just a plethora of opportunities there.
Those are great. Yeah, thank you for that. As you said, there's a lot of things we can do. It's all about now finding the right ones for us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Jessica, it's been great having you on the podcast. This has been a great talk. If some of our listeners want more from you, how can they reach you?
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a really enjoyable conversation, so I really appreciated it. If you want to find me, probably the best place is Twitter. You can find me at Jessica E. West, and there, or you can go to my website, jessica.dev, and that's got my LinkedIn and email and a few other things. So if Twitter's not really your jam, you can find me there.
Thank you for that. And for our listeners, thank you for listening to Under the Hood of Developer Marketing, the podcast devoted to developer marketing and relations. You can listen to all episodes, find free resources and the latest news at DevRel.com. And you can also subscribe to our bite-sized bi-weekly digest or follow us on Twitter at /datahq. Jessica, thank you very much.
Thank you.